making when we've got members in our team going through different processes. And so like I've said already, there's different things to consider when adopting a child, and we thought this would be a really good opportunity to understand the additional considerations of adopting the child, including the process, how it begins, preparing for the child to arrive, as well as going on adoption leave when you're comparing it to a natural pregnancy process. So today we're going to highlight how teams can better support parents going through the adoption process in the workplace and what to be aware of. So I'll start with Nicola. Can you share your experience of the adoption process, including if you were the parent taking adoption leave, and what do you think the differences are between a natural birth process and the things we need to consider?
Oh, thank you, Aman. It's great to be able to share this with everybody. Although I must admit, I'm racking my brains a bit because I was just looking back. We first went into the adoption process in January 2005. My eldest child is now 13. We've adopted two girls in two separate processes. So it's quite a while ago now since our eldest was placed with us in 2009 and our youngest in 2013. Yeah, my eldest is now looking down on me rather than being a small thing anymore. It'll happen, Adam, it'll happen. They grow. So yes, it was, I was in an acute trust at the time. So I felt very well supported from I felt well supported in that there were policies, there were procedures that had been considered. Interestingly, as we went through the process, and you might have picked up from our dates that we were a good 5 years from having started the process till our first being matched and placements. It was quite a long process at the time. Actually, the detail wasn't always there because I think there's a lot of assumptions made. And that might well have changed. It was quite some time ago, and it was quicker the second time when we went round. And yes, I was the parent that took adoption leave. So I took probably I think I was probably about 12 months first time round and 9 months second time round, which is probably quite traditional. And I think the main thing that I would say that isn't that the same as a natural birth process is we didn't have a due date. We had no date that we were working to at all. So you're in a process where personally you just don't know when you might need to stop work. And that goes right across the whole of what your experience. Do you book that big holiday next year, or might you have a child? What do you think about this? When do you do a major piece of redecoration in the house? What do? You may well be smiling at me, Adam, because Adam knows our eldest arrived the same day our new kitchen did, because it all happened very quickly when she was placed with us. And that's another thing that I had to deal with. Literally, we went to matching panel and introduction started 10 days later, along with the ripping out and putting in of a kitchen. So that was all a bit sort of major, but that's kind of what you're balancing. So I think that's the main thing that was really different from my perspective is there was a huge long waiting time and then it all happened really quickly. It's difficult for a service to plan with that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nicola. And Adam, how was your experience?
I would echo everything that Nicola said. That notion that there's no due date is really unsettling, and it does kind of give you just this sense of impending what's going to happen tomorrow. That's really difficult to plan your career around, and the team that you're working with might struggle with that as well, not knowing whether you're going to be here next week or the week after. So that can be difficult for the teams. I think from my experience, the difference between the natural birth process and if you have a biological an adopted child is that there's a lot more people involved in the adoption. So lots more people will have an interest in your ability to reproduce, or your ability to parent, or your ability to take time off work to parent. So there's a lot more people involved and a lot more judgment than probably if you are a biological parent, it's just two people who get pregnant. Whereas if you are adopting, there's a lot more people involved who have skin in the game. They're they want to know exactly what's going to happen to this child. And I struggled a little bit with that because I'm quite a private person, even though I'm on this live telling everyone my story. I don't like everyone knowing all the ins and outs of my life. But to adopt a child, you kind of have to let people do that. And that's why now I'm a lot more comfortable sharing kind of sensitive details about my life, because I've done it once with lots of different people. And the outcome of that was wonderful. I got a child who is amazing, and therefore I'm a lot more used to that now. So in some ways, I think it's different that there's a lot more people involved, but you also grow a lot more as well.
And were you the one that took adopted leave, or was that your partner?
So we shared it. We took 6 months each. The plan pretty much all the way through the process of adoption, from when we started the information gathering to signing up to say we were interested, it was always going to be me that took the leave. And then about a month after we'd found out about our son, and we were still going through the process of introductions and chemistry visits and things like that, the plan changed, and my husband wanted to take 6 months, and he wanted to take the first 6 months, and I then took the last 6 months. So yeah, we ended up making it pretty fairly between the two of us.
Oh, that's nice. That's really good. And I suppose that's something that's missing in the natural birthing process. So you can't really, well, I suppose you can share, actually. You can share, but I don't know how common it is. Yeah.
Sorry, I think you can share it in a natural birth, but there's obviously the physical trauma of delivery that has an impact on people's ability to go back to work. Whereas when you adopt, that isn't the same. You're both kind of coming to it as physically well as you were at the beginning. So yeah, I think that's another difference as well. I guess the process of actually going into it.
Yeah, and you kind of know, as much as there's not as much planning, or there's you don't know when it's due. There's also an element of you kind of know what you're doing a little bit more as well. I suppose it's different. And like with maternity leave, if you're breastfeeding, for example, you might need to take the whole year off to continue nursing the baby. So that's really interesting. I suppose just taking a bit of a step back for people that might not know about the process or how it even starts. Nicola, you mentioned you were in it for 5 years, but are there bits of time that you need to take away from work that actually aren't the same as people who are pregnant, who have clinic appointments and you just go, and they're kind of honoured? Did you have that same experience of appointments that you needed to make? Did you have to take leave for it, or are they just given because they're part of a parenting process, if that makes sense? So Adam, if you want to, what was your experience with that?
So I was working for a university at the time, and we had a set number of days that we could take as part of the build-up. But if you needed more than that, which you do, or we did in the adoption process, you had to take annual leave for that. So there was a few days that we got that would kind of be reflective of clinic appointments if I was pregnant. But there was actually a lot more of those appointments because of the adoption process. I guess my friends that have been pregnant and had additional doctor's appointments and things, they've been allowed to take those as kind of sick leave, where I wasn't allowed to do that. So that again, I guess, is the difference between adoption and biological reproduction.
Yeah. Nicola, what was your experience?
It was the same.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was getting at around the detail in the policy, because it sort of says, yes, it's fine. And then you start going in, oh, hang on, how many? What do you mean you need more? What do you mean? And for us, as I say, our process, without going into the detail, was a lot more prolonged than I think people had wanted. So actually, there were times when it was we needed more. Adam, you're absolutely right. It did feel a bit like, well, actually, if this had just been a particular reason that if I'd been pregnant that I needed to have gone, it would have been without a second thought. But it was also seen as a meeting. It wasn't seen as a hospital appointment. It wasn't related to my health. So it was a meeting, and that was on both sides. so the agency, I remember, would say, well, why can't you come to it when we want to have it? Well, because actually it is a meeting, and could we flex it because I've got something actually that's important at work. And then the agency, your social worker, would say, but when you have a child, I'm like, well, I don't know now, and I'm feeling judged. I'm Adam. You feel judged about whether. So do I say yes to having this appointment and take the flack at work? Or do I take the flack from somebody who may or may not say that Nicola would put work before children? Well, yeah. So it's really tricky to balance when, as you say, Adam, it's not physical health being looked at.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting because that judgment is already starting before the child has arrived. And what do you do? No, and I think that's an important point for managers and team members to consider, because if you're feeling judged, it might impact your well-being at work and the way you're focusing, and because you've got this big significant thing happening in your personal life. So kind of, I suppose, building on that, through your experiences, did you have any challenges or barriers or any negative attitudes that you experienced? Nicola, I'll come to you first.
That's a really good question. We didn't share at the time with more than an immediate circle that this was a process we were going through for similar reasons, I think, as Adam. It's very personal. Your reasons why you are choosing to adopt, particularly as a heterosexual couple, were very much picked apart, again, judged about why you've made that choice. And so we didn't share. So within work, I don't think that I experienced a huge number of that's the way, apart from my own personal challenges of managing my workload. And once we had been approved for adoption, that point about waiting to be matched with a child, trying to always manage the expectation of my line manager, the expectation of what projects I was taking on. Any project that you took on that was, well, it didn't even need to be long term, but you do start thinking long term when you've been waiting for quite a while. You're always trying to plan it to think, well, what if I have to leave it tomorrow? And I mean, it's probably very good practice to make sure that you document everything you're doing. Maybe that is good practice we should all adhere to. But you're right, Ammon, it has a feeling that you have with it. So my negative attitudes were more from working with social services and what they were saying, the judgment they were putting on, all those experiences that we went through and how that was impacting my health and well-being. While around you, people are pregnant, they are having babies, they are having more than one pregnancy, and you are sitting there going, it's 5 years since we started this journey, which we were assured at the time would be quick. So you're carrying that inside as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because of all the other things that are going on. Adam, how about yourself?
I guess similar, that there's a lot of kind of emotional baggage that comes with it. And I guess because it's a private thing as well, people often don't know what's going on. And then you're carrying this extra weight, and therefore you have these conversations on a daily basis with your team members who might not know what's going on behind the scenes. And so that for me was quite a challenge, in that, you wanted to say something, but equally you didn't want to say something in case it wasn't going to have an immediate impact. And that kind of double identity was a bit of a challenge for me. I think I struggled as well when people would ask the questions, if they did find out, like, so what are you going to have? Like, are you going to have a blue-eyed, blonde-haired little girl, or are you going to go for a brown-eyed, dark-haired boy, or those types of questions? And my husband is from India, so that added an extra element of complexity to it, that people were interested and wanted to know what ethnicity of the child was going to get, and do we get to choose that, and things like that. So I got quite uncomfortable with those questions. It's a difficult decision to make, and ultimately is loaded with judgment. And so then if you're chatting about that over coffee in the middle of doing something and something else, it's quite tricky to have that big emotional conversation in the middle of work. So it's kind of like, I can't redo this. So that was something that I struggled with a little bit. And then the other thing I struggled with was, obviously as a homosexual couple, all the forms were mum and dad, mum and dad, mum and dad. And I was like, well, I'm not mum and I'm not dad yet. And like, I don't really know where to put me and where to put my husband. So some of the paperwork was just, you know, a bit insensitive, a bit jarring when you read that. And I know there's no solution to that. You know, you can't just erase motherhood from every form in the world. But it was something that I was kind of like, oh, well, I'm not actually, and my child won't have that relationship, and won't have that person in their life. So I don't know what to put here. So it is a very deep and emotional experience that you end up kind of burying down, so that you can do the superficial pleasantries at work of, oh yes, hello, how are you, and then kind of dealing with it underneath.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Adam. That's really insightful, because I think people sometimes might see it a bit transactional, like you do a process and you get a baby and it's all wonderful, happy families, but there's a lot more going on. And with the paperwork, like it could be more gender neutral, you know, parent isn't erasing anyone's, you know, parenting role in anything, but it's really interesting in that. And also, I suppose people are mean well by asking because they're interested, but actually some of those questions can be intrusive. And yeah, and then and you're trying to do your work and your job, and then you've got these other things that are in the background. So that's, yeah, thank you for sharing that experience, Adam. I suppose more positively, were there anything in your experience that you found really supportive that organizations that you work for did, and you'd actually encourage other organizations to do things similar? So Adam, I suppose coming back to you on a more positive spin, was there anything that you did encourage, that you experienced?
So my line managers were really good in that I told them and then said, please don't tell anyone. And they were really good at not doing that. So they only, you know, they would check with me, is it okay if we say this? And is it okay if we say that? And, you know, are you comfortable doing this? So that was something that I found really positive from work. I think also when I actually took the leave, work was really good in that they kind of just let me go. It wasn't like well, could you just do this, and could you just do this, and could you just do this, which I know other people have experienced when they've gone on adoption leave, again because you haven't gone through a difficult, you know, physical exertion of giving birth. People just assume, oh well, you know, there'll be nap time, so could you just do this little piece of work? But
during while you're off, you mean?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Oh, I see. Not just before you go.
No. So once you've gone off and you've got your child at home, people who have children will know that there is nap time, and in nap time you probably could read a paper or do some work or do a bit of marking. But my team were really, really good initially, and were just like, no, you can't. You're not doing those things. You're off. You're away, which was really helpful and gave me the chance to be away and kind of be with my son for the first, I think, 4 weeks initially, and then I went back to work while my husband took the leave. And again, that was kind of a weird, I'm back, but I'm not really back. And that's where, again, my employer was really, really good. And the team that I was working with was really good in that they knew we had this new person at home who we were trying to manage. And so they were really flexible with that, which, again, you know, I'm really grateful for and really lucky to have had, which was great. And then when I went back to work, did a phased return, so I was able to do little bits here and there that meant that it wasn't just right now you're back and you have to deal with everything again. It was a phased process that was really helpful in kind of getting my brain back into gear and thinking about things differently and things like that. So those were the positives for me, like a flexible employer, one that, you know, worked on my terms in terms of what information was shared and when.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Adam. Nicola, how was your experience?
Yeah, I think similar in that respect, Adam. I was just just dragging my mind back to think about it, that the two occasions, certainly the first time, as I say, it was within kind of 2 working weeks I was gone. So again, HR is supportive, the policies are there, it happens, but my line manager was able to manage that and to go, okay, yes, and not, yeah, you're right, Adam. Thinking about not contact me at all, not do any of the, oh, and while you're there, could you just in that way. And the second time round, we'd more prep time second time round, and it was the same. Yeah, that would be, and I think that's really important. And just that recognition that actually, whilst it's a planned process and there's been lots of paperwork, there's all of that, actually you're then working to the need of the child. And as Adam says, lots of people are involved, but you've got your agency, you've got your foster parents who are perhaps they're going through an emotional journey as well, because they will have fostered that child for a period of time and attached to them in that way. So you've got your foster family and yourselves, you're all trying to come up with a mutual time. So actually, yeah, it's not just work that has the sway over when you can and can't go on start your adoption, even start your introductions process. Yeah. And I think one other thing that I was thinking, because we adopted preschool. In fact, I adopted a 4-month-old and an 11-month-old, which is very unusual. I have friends who've adopted school-age children, and I don't know what their experiences would be, but I think it's different. Just listening to you, Adam, talking about a new person. Actually, you might be settling a new person, and you might be settling them into school. You might be settling, and there's lots of things that an organisation might need to consider, that this is not the same as a tiny baby. Yeah. And it didn't necessarily mean that if you're adopting a slightly older child, that you're getting any more sleep. I'll just put that out there as well.
Oh no, completely. And I think because just from a personal experience with my friends and family, there might be an adjustment. There's definitely an adjustment period for the child and the parent. Because if they're particularly not a baby, they've come from different experiences, and adapting to another environment in itself can be challenging. So just taking that into consideration, and you're in a situation like you said where you have a child who's at school, suddenly now you have a school run and everything that comes with that to consider in your day, whereas it just before it was you going to work and getting yourself back home. So all of those extra conversations need to be had with your line manager and provide that support. So just building on those bits that of positivity and the things that worked, is there anything else that you'd recommend teams and or like line managers to consider that would support parents and people going through the adoption process in the workplace in addition? So Nicola?
I think a lot of it's been raised already in our conversations so far, but the main thing I think is not to make any assumptions, and that again, everybody's experience will be different. You might know somebody who's adopted or going through the process yourself. You might already have somebody in your organisation, your team, that's happened to. But actually, everybody's experiences will be different because of where we're coming from and perhaps what agency we're working with, whether it's the local authority-based one, whether it's an independent one, where we where we live, where my address is, determined which place, which locality we could adopt from in it. And it's those sort of little things that would be different to somebody who might be living in a different part of the city. So it's all those things, and very much, as Adam says, respecting how much they want to share and what that means, and understanding how long is a piece of string. We don't know. And that does actually tell on you as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Nicola. Adam?
I think for me, there's two things. There's flexibility and knowing that, you know, you're going to have to juggle things around with that person. So if they're a team member and it's something like who can cover this shift or that shift or the other shift, having flexibility, I think is really important. If you're a line manager managing someone and somebody books annual leave and then cancels it and then needs to book it again and then cancels it again and books it again, that's the type of thing that as a manager can get really frustrating, and you can start to think, what is going on with this person? But that's the nature of adoption, unfortunately, that things are sometimes a bit wishy-washy. So that flexibility, I think, is really important. And then the second thing is just a little bit of kindness. So we might, as an adopter, you might get told about a child and then be given 2 weeks to make a decision about whether you want to take that child home. And in that 2 weeks, you still have to go to work. Like, you still have to perform your 100% or your 110%, as some people give, and you know, be there and engaged and you know, deliver, whilst also in the back of your mind thinking about this small person who, you know, their life is going to change, your life is going to change, and you're making that decision whilst also working full time. So, you know, people who are adopters maybe aren't going to be, you know, 100% all the time. They're going to maybe need an extra coffee break or an extra tea break, or maybe just some kindness to kind of get them through that day at work. Because for sure, when they go home, they'll be racking their brains and their hearts trying to work out what the right thing for them to do is. So flexibility and kindness would be the two suggestions for me.
Amazing. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Nicola, as well. I think they're really good suggestions, because also there's nothing physical, I suppose. It's not like there's a bump where you can see that there's a person, a little bit person attached to you. So that visibility perhaps is missing. So you forget about the emotional and well-being piece of this piece of work. So thank you both for sharing your experiences today, and I think it's been really insightful, because it's not a topic we talk about very often in pharmacy, and all the extra things that come with it. So thank you again for sharing, and thank you for anyone that's listening. We've not had any questions, so if you do have any questions after, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And as part of our Parents and Carers campaign, we're continuing to raise awareness on different topics. If there's anything you feel that we haven't done so far, please do get in touch, and we can have a chat about it. So, but again, thank you, Nicola and Adam, and thank you to everyone listening, and I'll see you again soon.